read Saturnastra Chalon. This is chapter 7. Chalon rattled his memory, and eventually the ultimate weapon told him the answer he was seeking. We only know of the basic attributes of the polar guards, but they are not one-trick ponies. Ortisa, aside from being the goddess of the earth, by earth I mean dirt, she was also associated with old age, and this was in part due to the wrinkles the ground obtained whenever there was a drought. Chalon then wrote, the Temple of Ortisa is that way. He also added to his instructions an arrow pointing to the left, and this required crossing a busy street, and there were no lights or posts to allow pedestrians to cross the roads, and many a times one had to wait till two carriage drivers had the decency to let you pass, and this could either go quickly or take an hour. And it was at this juncture that Lady Jean took Chalon's arm for support, and since it was a couple of hours before dusk, the street was pretty busy. And there were lots of comings and going, especially of delivery people bringing in fresh meat from the markets. And it was common for brothels to hold banquets at night. And after waiting for 7 minutes, two carriages finally stopped to allow Chalon and Lady Jean to pass. And one of them gestured with his whip, and with as much speed as Jean could muster, they crossed the busy road. And on the last step that led back into the sidewalk, Lady Jean's heel got stuck in one of the stones a bit, and she fell to the side, and she would have smacked her head against the wheel of a passing carriage if Chalon had not supported her with both his arms. Lady Jean grasped her chest for air and from fright, and Chalon left her standing erect, and he came to fetch her cane that had fallen on the ground. And she took a couple of steps on her own, using it for support, and then she commented, "You are quite stout for such a pretty little thing." In response, Chalon rode after giving her her cane. "Does your leg hurt?" Lady Jean placed her entire support on one foot and her cane, and then she wiggled about her feet to check for any unusual pains. And she did the same thing with her other feet, and then she said, "Nothing hurts." Chalon shook his head sadly for reasons that Lady Jean could not understand. And she thought that he pitied her, and she found him quite detestable for that reason. As for Chalon, this dour expression had triggered something else he had seen, and on the road he noted a squished little frog, and it reminded him of one of his mother's early memories. And it was not too uncommon for people like him to show an interest on memories relating to their past humanity. And it had been so long for many, and given in our generation, many no longer consider themselves to be human. Chalon chose to remember these truths, and this allowed him to empathize with the locals and even at times forget his true nature. And as for the raw frog, it was quite familiar with a particular memory. And Chalon's mother was in school, and one day a brat brought a frog, and it escaped and it hopped across the road, and it was eventually run over by a bike, and she cannot remember what or if she felt anything at all. And it is common that our people develop a disassociation with the past, and they see the images and remember the events clearly, but the thoughts and emotions at the time do not make an impression. And such is the nature of most memories that existed before the creation of the ultimate weapon. And Lady Jean eventually did notice what Chalon was looking at, and he had the same dour expression he wore whenever he could not revive a fellow. And then he said, "It's just a frog, let's go." Chalon left her alone and entered traffic, and a carriage did a poor stop unseating the passenger but not the driver. And the passenger opened the door and asked, "What's the hold-up?" And the driver said nothing, and he pointed to the weirdo dressed like a mage in the middle of the road. And the passenger, frowning, said, getting back inside the carriage, "Well, you should have run him over, and we could do with less of their kind on the street." "Murder is still a crime in the city," said the driver politely. "I suppose," he said, and then he said to Chalon through the window, "Move, weirdo." Chalon chose to be oblivious to all of his surroundings, and he drew a handkerchief from under his arm, and then he placed it over the dead frog, and then he punched the ground over the handkerchief, and when he lifted the cloth, the frog was no longer there. And some of the people waiting to cross it thought it was a show, so they lingered to see what else he was going to do. And a girl carrying eggs was among them, and Chalon came to her, and he took one of her eggs. And then he placed the handkerchief over it, and then he smashed it against his face, and when the handkerchief looked all yellow and gooey, Chalon rolled it back into a ball, and when the handkerchief was nice and round, he opened it again, and inside was the egg intact, and he handed the egg to the girl, and he wrote, "Open it." The girl did not know how to read and was too embarrassed to admit it, and reading her mind on this matter, Chalon opened the egg, and inside was the frog, alive and well. And the people clapped, thinking it was an elaborate magic trick, and some threw coins at Chalon's feet. And the carriage driver and the passenger lingered a little more to make certain that Chalon did not have anything else up his sleeve. And when they saw the crowd dispersing, the carriage continued on its way, and as for the frog, Chalon helped it cross the street, and he left it in its destination, the gardens of the pavilion. And one of the guards who was patrolling rose an eyebrow but did not say anything to hinder Chalon, and with his pertinence taking care of, Chalon went to join Lady Jean, and he offered his arms, and pointing with her cane, she said, gesturing to the coins, "Aren't you forgetting something?" Chalon looked at the coins on the floor with dismay. Ideally, he was not the type of fellow who sought to make a profit out of corpses. Still, he did like money in whatever form it came. And so he bent over and he picked out the scant coins one by one, and the little egg girl too was doing that behind Chalon's back. And she blushed when she noticed Lady Jean staring daggers at her, and in her end, her desire for scant profit won her over, and she left with a handful of coins that rightfully belonged to Chalon. After concluding this annoying little task, Chalon joined Jean on her trip to the temple, and they were only a block away from the destination, and Lady Jean said while they walked, "You should have said something to the little girl." In response, Chalon squished his lips with his index and tongue to illustrate that he did not wish to speak. "You should have said something to the girl." And Lady Jean added, "Is it because she did not read that it is because she cannot read that you should use your voice? You aren't going to find literate people everywhere in the world, and one day you're going to be in a position where you are forced to speak." In response to this statement, Chalon drew a picture of two people crossing a bridge, and Lady Jean was not familiar with the bridge crossing saying, still she imagined that she understood what the picture meant. "Well, I mean, I will cross the bridge when I get to it." So he drew a picture of people crossing a bridge. She thought that what Chalon meant to say was that if he could not use written words, he would just draw a picture and hope for the best. And the pair walked slowly, and even slower was the pace of a prospective pickpocket. And it was tradition of the day, the fellow bumped into Chalon, and instead of saying sorry or watch where you're going, the fellow gave a yelp of pain. An expression of glee was painted on Chalon's face, and meanwhile Lady Jean laughed heartily, and another pickpocket had fallen for the irresistible lure. And the fellow left somewhat confused, rubbing his stinging hand, and the laughter of Lady Jean turned into two hoarse coughs, and clearing her throat, she commented, "There are certainly a lot of pickpockets here." "Just about the average amount," wrote Chalon. "Based on statistics, for every 250 citizens, there is at least one criminal. There are some regional variants, both overall, and this is the average rate found in most large cities and towns, and the flavor of the crime is usually petty thievery, and some are even perpetrated by people who can easily afford the stolen goods. Those found out are usually killed on the act, and of most criminals, only a quarter make it to prison, and even fewer manage to survive their sentences. And criminal punishment in this world usually involves either dungeon, forced labor camps, or torture chambers. Thus lucky ones usually got a small dosage of public humiliation, and society was one of the few hosts who did not work their prison population to death, and La Imperia was naive in so much as she believed that she could reform evildoers and make them useful members of society once again, and the workhouse was one of her pet projects in that department. And the reason behind it was that her best friend growing up was a servant boy, and he got worked to death for stealing a pair of shoes from her. And this incident stayed with her the rest of her life, and so she worked strongly to reform the justice system in the kingdom, and she believed that the punishment should match the nature of the crime, and it should not be arbitrarily cruel to the poor and easy for the rich, and so she codified justice system in her code with punishment calibrated based on the severity of the crime and the reasoning behind it. And this has nothing to do with Chalon, so let us move on with the rest of the pertinent with the story. And Chalon and Lady Jean were finally standing before the temple, and the terrible tradition varied from city to city. And here there were the humbler structures surrounded by gardens, and this one was spherical shaped, like a ball. The time, bro?
14 minutes.
From the oculus of the perfect dome, there sat a giant Jacaraba mimosifolia.
What?
The tree at the moment was flowering with gorgeous purple bellflowers, And the ground around the main body of the temple were littered with those flowers, and since it was a temple to the goddess of the earth as in dirt, not planet Earth, it made sense that the examples of her bounty could be found all over the temple grounds. And the temple itself was 2 stories high, with the main living apartments on the 2nd floor. And on the bottom floor there was the place of worship, and one of her prayers to Ortisa by bringing with you a live plant. And the size of it did not matter, only the bigger. And if it grew in the gardens, it meant that your offering had been accepted. And in the old days, they used to do traditional animal sacrifices. And as of lately, blood sacrifices were being slowly retired. And some sets had gotten a bit more thematic as far as offerings were concerned, and at the moment the temple was just open to prayers. And the rituals of Ortisa usually took place during the winter months, and they were designed to play for a bountiful harvest for the next year. And the first ground floor was covered with vegetation, and there were stone pathways to smaller rooms, and inside each room there was a chair and a little fountain for meditation. And the 2nd floor was held up by St. columns that branched outwards like the hands of a tree. And some of them had climbing vines like bougainvillea and campis, honeysuckles, jacinta beans, and healthy variety of clematis. And during certain human nights, the gardens in the temple would become aglow with green lights, and a colony of 100,000 fireflies had taken residence there. And it had started with a donated plant that had about 20 fireflies, and about 60 were female and 4 were males, and over the years their numbers increased till they became quite a spectacle. The priest currently handling the temple was named Passiflora, and in her former life she was a nymph slave who was born in a plantation, and her husband, a traveling merchant, bought her and made her his wife, and the pair eventually fell into this whole religion thing in society, and at the moment Passiflora was a widower like Lady Jean, and as such she sported a white dress without any ornamentation, and her ritual staff was a stick with a pine cone on it. And the stick had a red ribbon tied beneath the pine cone, and despite her 79 years of age, she kept in good form. And she ran the temple with the help of her 8 daughters. And she did have a son as well, but he did not care for temple, and instead he played night in the pavilions. Lady Jean and Chalon were greeted by one of Passiflora's daughters, and her name was Amapola. And she was a redhead like her father, and she had even teeth, short curly hair, tan skin, and a delicate frame. And using a polite tone, she asked, "Are you here for meditation?" "Yes," said Lady Jean. "We only have a room available at the moment, but you can share if you do not mind the company," said Passiflora. "I do not mind," said Lady Jean. "You are familiar with the current race, are you not?" asked Amapola. Chalon opened his coin purse, and Amapola felt the weight of the pouch over the top, but did not open it to look at the coins, and the temple made its money through room rentals, and the worshippers came there to be alone with their thoughts, but for a price. And the rental was always 30 coins, and it did not matter if they were gold, silver, or copper. Depending on the generosity of the patrons, some paid with gold coins. Still, most of the time people paid with copper. And for this, Amapola was greatly resentful. And before leading them to a room, Amapola said, "A flower is customary." And in response, Chalon reached into his pocket and he brought out a little Astrophintu asterias. Amapola looked at the tiny plant and she raised an eyebrow, and she had never seen a plant like that before, and in the end she ran to the plant nursery and left it there to deal with it when she got to it. A cactus and other desert plants were extremely rare, and the only desert in the continent was on the other side of a mountain cut off from the rest of the green habitable lands on the other side, and its only source of moisture was a mist rising from the ocean. And since it was so inhospitable for human habitation, it was rare for anything related to the desert to appear on the kingdom. When the girl returned, she had a key to the private meditation room.
Sorry.
Time, bro?
9 minutes.
The rooms were at the other side of the temple, straight ahead from the entrance, past the stone altar, and the tree in the center of the temple. And the position of the sun allowed for sunlight to enter through the foliage, and most of the dome roof was hollow. And the sun and rain entered through the ornamental roof steel and composed of hollow square panels. And inside each panel was an interesting wire floral pattern. and not a single flower was repeated, and the roof was quite experimental architecture, and there was no other temple like this in the kingdom, and it was frequented often just because of the architecture and the plants and the good vibe. And the room itself had a stone floor, and to open it one had to place a large floral-shaped crest into a sunken relief in the center door. And after turning it to the left 4 times and then 8 times to the right, the door opened. And those that did pay attention would notice that before turning, the floral crest would stop at specific numbers, and it acted like one of those traditional dial combination padlocks. And the nature of the crest allowed for only for 8 numbers. Still, the length of the numbers or the turns helped somewhat to keep people from guessing the combination. And it was rare that a temple arose in a curiosity for doors to be picked, and from time to time an odd thief would venture in to have a look. And they would always leave empty-handed, and something about the way the temple looked at night spooked them, and it was mainly the center tree. And it had an unusually thick trunk, like fat trunk. And it had a somewhat round hollow, and when the wind entered the roof, it made a dull groaning sound. At least to me, it sounds like groaning. And Chalon has heard the tree make sounds before, and on the rainy day that he heard it, the tree sounded like the wings of a hummingbird. Like that. Every person of us who has heard the stupid tree claims that it makes a different sound, and at this station a fellow to observe the tree, and indeed the acoustics of it are quite varied, and overall, this 571 old tree makes 21 different sounds from its hollow. And after entering the room, the door was closed behind Chalon and Lady Jean, and there was a string on the wall, and when Pooh and Mapola would hear a small bell in the reception room, and each bell rung corresponded to a different room, and they were used for letting her know when the people were already bored of meditating, or whatever the hell they were doing. Regardless, she would kick them out after an hour, or maybe sooner, depending on demand, and most people tended to lose track of time inside those rooms, and the furniture inside it was simple, and there was a wooden bench with a cushion parallel to a fountain, and the walls were covered with Parthenocissus quinquefolia, a type of shade creeper. And since the roof of this room was hollow, a bit of shaded sunlight got inside, and at the moment the leaves of the plants were colored red.
6 minutes.
And as for the wall fountain, it had an intimidating dog-faced dragon spewing a stream of water on the basin that overflowed into an ornamental structure. Chalon looked into the well, expecting to see coins or something, and he was somewhat disappointed to see nothing within it. And after helping Lady Jean sit down, he reached into his pocket and he threw a coin into the fountain. And Lady Jean frowning gestured to Chalon to come closer, and taking his board, she wrote to him, "Why did you throw that coin?" In response, Chalon wrote, "Because that is how wishing fountains work." "Wishing fountains? I never heard that fountains granted wishes," wrote Lady Jean. "Not all fountains grant wishes, and those that do rarely bother to grant them," wrote Chalon. "I see," said Lady Jean. And then she returned the board to Chalon to settle down with her own thoughts. She took the cinco pelo and she placed it at the edge of the bench, and then she simmered down after removing her bonnet. And despite looking rather fancy, Lady Jean's dress was quite comfortable, and mainly because she did not use a corsage. And after a couple of minutes of lying there, Lady Jean started snorting, and Chalon grinned but said nothing, and the place indeed was perfect for a good nap, and it was a pity that the hostess did not have the decency to set up beds instead of wooden benches. Heck, even some straw thrown on the floor would have made a welcome relief to weary bones. And Chalon looked at the walls a bit, and they were easily climbable, and still he felt the effort would move the plants a bit too much, and instead he gently floated above the room, and when he was over, he pushed himself lightly to the other door room to see what other people were up to. The person to the left was snoring. Meanwhile, the fellow on the right was reading a book. And as far as meditation went, Lady Jean's nearest neighbors were not doing it right, and aside from the rituals, the Temple of Ortisa did not have a clear definition of what is meditation. And there were never group meditation centers, and even among the sisters and mothers there was variety of opinion on the matter. And the temple had a nice relaxing vibe and attitude, and it's the point I'm trying to make. So meditation is just like a relaxation room where you just are surrounded by nature. And you're allowed to do whatever. as long as it's relaxing and not loud. There was one time when a late follower from another temple had made a big deal about the snoring neighbor, and he was not allowed to visit again for making a fuss in the meditation room. All in all, negative emotions were discouraged, and since everyone seemed to be in a chill type of mood, Chalon took a moment to look around the temple. And as he gently flew about, he noticed some birds entering the hollow of the tree, and when he drew near, he saw that the nest was being occupied by a pair of wrens. W-R-E-N-S. The birds were looking after three small eggs, and they did not make a fuss about Chalon drawing a bit closer, and he perched on a nearby branch to look at the tiny birds, and his reverie was interrupted when Amapola came and yelled, "Get off the branch before you fall and break your neck." And Chalon gingerly dropped from the branch, and he landed on top of a wet root, and disgusting to slip and fall on his face. Chalon quickly got up, and he brushed the grass and dirt from his clothing. Amapola then noticed the sign that Chalon was carrying about him and pouting a bit. She said, "Oh, such a nuisance. And how did you get out of the meditation room? Did you climb?" Chalon shook his head in response, and Amapola then added, "Well, no matter. If your business is concluded, then be gone with you." Chalon took his board and he wrote, "I am waiting for someone to wake up." "Again? Sheesh, whatever, I don't care," said Amapola, and she added, "You're a wizard." "No," wrote Chalon. "Liar, and what with that laugh flying about earlier, and did the gods grant you the ability to fly? Or are you a dragon? Either way, you must do a little magic," asked Amapola. "I am a magic user, but not a wizard," wrote Chalon. "For outsiders reading this little report, I suppose some explanations are in order. Among our people, only one person is allowed the title of wizard. And since Chalon is not that person, he will never be called himself a wizard." "Sounds like splitting hair, if you ask me. And can you do magic?" insisted Amapola. "I can summon a bunny out of a hat," wrote Chalon. "I don't need bunnies. I need someone who can do an exorcism," said Amapola. "Time, bro?"
2 minutes, 30 seconds.
"Sure, I will buy, but this place doesn't feel haunted to me," wrote Chalon. "Come with me, and then you will see," said Amapola. Chalon looked at the position of the sun, and then he looked back at the room that housed Lady Jean, and she usually slept for an hour or two if left undisturbed, and he still had some time to kill before it was time to return home. And Chalon followed behind Amapola, not knowing what to expect, and she led him to some stairs into the residential portion of the temple. And while going up the wooden steps, he heard the boards groan, and he stopped, and Amapola stopped as well, and the steps behind Chalon had grown as if a person had given a step. Alright, so let's leave it here. Bye-bye and God bless.